Hey everybody, welcome back to the Withstand podcast. It's a real blessing to have you here with me as we continue to read our way through the pages of the Holy Bible. Today's episode, we are back in the book of Acts and we continue to learn a little bit more about Paul's story subsequent to his arrest in Jerusalem. Today we'll be reading through chapter 23. This is God's word. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?" And those who stood by said, "Do you revile God's high priest?" Then Paul said, "I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them, and bring him into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went out and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man depart, and commanded him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." And he called for 2 centurions, saying, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely to Felix the governor." He wrote a letter in the following manner: "Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him, deserving of death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell." Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him, and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear you when your accusers also have come." and he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. This is the word of the Lord. Lots to unpack there, so let's see what Tom Constable has to write about the plot against Paul. Evidently, Paul intended to give his testimony again, this time to the Sanhedrin. He addressed this body using the formal address common among Jews, brothers, literally meaning men and brothers. He identified himself as a Jew by his manner of speech, since his loyalty to Judaism was in question. Paul frequently claimed to have lived with a clear conscience before God. Paul referred to the conscience about 23 times in his epistles. Here this claim meant that he believed that nothing he had done, which he was about to relate, was contrary to the will of God as revealed in the Hebrew Scriptures. Specifically, his Christian beliefs and conduct did not compromise his Jewish heritage. He was not, of course, claiming sinlessness, nor was he referring to the inner spiritual conflicts of Romans 7. The reference was to the externals of his life and the blamelessness of his conduct as measured by the demands of the law. Many people erroneously believe that their conscience is the voice of God, but is not. The human conscience is a part of the mind that is programmed by one's upbringing, training, and propaganda. In short, one's experience in life. It signals us before, during, or after we depart from what we have come to believe is correct. Paul's claim to uprightness so incensed the high priest Ananias that he ordered a soldier to strike Paul on the mouth. Why would Paul's statement have drawn such a violent response from Ananias? Probably Ananias viewed Paul as a turncoat Jew, one who had abandoned traditional Judaism for Christianity, and for Paul to claim that he had lived before God with a clear conscience to the present day seemed blasphemous to Ananias. Probably Ananias, who was a Sadducee, had already made up his mind that Paul, who had been a Pharisee, was guilty. An officer of another high priest had similarly struck Jesus when he had testified before the Sanhedrin. Ananias became Israel's high priest in AD 47. He was not the Ananias who is called the high priest in the Gospels and in chapter 4. The Jewish high priesthood was a political appointment during Rome's occupation of Judea. Josephus described the Ananias as a despicable person. He seized for his own use tithes that should have gone to the ordinary priests, and he gave large bribes to Romans and Jews. The emperor at one point summoned him to Rome on charges of being involved in a bloody battle between Jews and Samaritans, but he escaped punishment. He was very wealthy and resorted to violence and even assassination to accomplish his ends. He was also very pro-Roman, and the Jews finally assassinated him in their uprising against Rome in AD 66, which was 9 years after Paul stood before him. Jewish law considered a person innocent until proved guilty, but Ananias had punished Paul before he had even been charged, much less tried and found guilty. Paul reacted indignantly and uttered a prophecy of Ananias' judgment that God fulfilled later. A whitewashed wall was one that was frequently inferior structurally, but looked good outwardly. Paul's reaction was extreme, but as he proceeded to explain, it resulted from misunderstanding. Some have felt that Paul's reaction shows that he was not acting under the leading of the Holy Spirit. Paul did not speak this in any sinful heat or passion, but in a holy zeal against the high priest's abuse of his power, not at all with a spirit of revenge. It is against all law, human and divine, natural and positive, to hinder a man from making his defense, and to condemn him unheard. It is inexcusable in a high priest that is appointed to judge according to the law. Paul may not have known that the person who commanded the soldier to strike him was the high priest for any number of reasons. Paul had not been in Jerusalem for an extended visit for over 20 years, and he may not have recognized the current high priest by sight. Perhaps Ananias was not wearing his high priestly robes, this occasion not being a regular meeting of the Sanhedrin. Or perhaps Paul was looking in another direction when Ananias gave the order to strike him. Perhaps Paul had poor eyesight. However, this seems less likely in view of verse 1. The passage to which some commentators appeal to argue that Paul had deficient eyesight does not really say that. Another possibility is that Paul was speaking in irony. He may have meant, "I did not think that a man who would give such an order could be the high priest." Some interpreters believe that Paul simply lost his temper. Others believe that he was apologizing. Paul voiced similar passionate utterances on other occasions. The high priest was a ruler of the Jews in a higher sense than was true of the rest of the Sanhedrin members. Paul's quotation from Exodus 22 showed that he was in subjection to God's revealed will, which he was on trial for repudiating. Being subject to governmental authorities is as much of a requirement under the new covenant as it was under the old. Paul quoted the old covenant here for the benefit of the Jews present who lived under it. Paul recognized that he could not get a fair trial in a court that did not even observe the law that it professed to defend, so he changed his tactics. He decided to divide the jury and began his defense again. This time he took the offensive. The issue of the hope and resurrection of the dead was fundamental in Paul's case. Israel's national hope of deliverance by her Messiah rested on the resurrection of that Messiah, as predicted in the Hebrew Scriptures. By raising the old controversy of whether resurrection is possible, Paul divided his accusers. Paul keeps coming back to the theme of hope and resurrection, even when it no longer provokes disruption, and it will be a central theme in Paul's climactic defense speech before King Agrippa. Paul is doing more than injecting a controversial subject into the Sanhedrin hearing. He is trying to change the entire issue of his trial, and he will persist in this effort in subsequent scenes. Therefore, the significance of Paul's statement that he is on trial concerning hope and resurrection of the dead can be understood only by considering the development of this theme in later scenes. Paul's belief in resurrection divided the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees denied the possibility of resurrection, as well as the existence of good angels and evil spirits, but the Pharisees believed in these things. The Pharisees sided with Paul, and the Sadducees opposed him. Their emotional dispute excluded any possibility of a serious examination of Paul's conduct, or even a clarification of the charges against him. The Pharisees, moreover, defended Paul's claim to have received a vision on the Damascus Road or in the temple, but the Sadducees rejected it. The Roman commander must have thrown up his hands in dismay. He was afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by these Jews. For a second time he could not discover what Paul had done or why so many Jews hated him. Pilate had a similar problem with Jesus, so Claudius Lysias decided to take Paul into protective custody in the fortress. Paul was undoubtedly wondering how he would ever get out of the mess in which he found himself. At this critical moment during the following night, the Lord appeared to him again and stood near him. The Lord's appearances to Paul all occurred at great crises in his life. He told Paul to be courageous, and he assured him that he would testify about Christ in Rome, as he had already done in Jerusalem. This revelation is essential to Luke's purpose in writing Acts, and it certainly must have given Paul confidence as the events that followed unfolded. When Jesus' witnesses were previously imprisoned, prison doors were wondrously opened for them. That is no longer the case. The Lord's reassurance must take the place of miraculously opening doors. The divine power that rescues from prison has become a powerful presence that enables a witness to endure an imprisonment that lasts for years. This assurance from the Lord meant much to Paul during the delays and anxieties of the next 2 years, and goes far to account for the calm and dignified bearing which seemed to mark him out as a master of events rather than their victim. The Jews' plot to kill Paul. This is the most detailed description of a plot against Paul in Acts. Paul's adversaries, the Jews, evidently agreed together not to eat nor drink again until Paul was dead. Their plan was to have the chief priests and the elders of Israel ask the Roman commander to return Paul to the Sanhedrin for further questioning. Assassins planned to kill him somewhere on the streets between the fortress of Antonia and the hall of the Sanhedrin. These two buildings were not far apart. The plotters surely realized that Paul's Roman guards might kill some of their number in the process. The oath was not so suicidal as it seems, since provision was made by the rabbis for releasing participants from the consequences of failure to carry out their purpose if external circumstances had made it possible. We know nothing more about Paul's sister than what Luke stated here. She may have lived in Jerusalem, Tarsus, or elsewhere. Obviously, her son, Paul's nephew, sided with his uncle rather than with the assassins. This is the only reference to Paul's immediate family in the New Testament. As citizens both of Tarsus and Rome, his family members had both wealth and status. Other writers use the Greek word neanian, translated young man, of persons in their 20s and 30s, as well as for younger men. However, verse 19 suggests that he may have even been younger than a teenager. Paul could receive visitors in the barracks where he was a prisoner because he was a Roman citizen in protective custody. He could also summon a centurion to do certain favours for him, which he did here. I find today that there is a group of super pious folk, very sincere and very well-meaning, which tells me I should not go to a doctor concerning my cancer or other illnesses, but that I should trust the Lord to heal me. Well, I certainly do trust the Lord. I have turned my case over to the great physician, and I believe he provides doctors. It would have been a simple thing for Paul to have told his nephew, "Thanks for telling me the news, but I'm trusting the Lord, so you can go back home." But we find here that Paul used the privileges of his Roman citizenship which were available to him. Obviously, the Lord provides these means and he expects us to use them. This in no way means that we are not trusting him. Rather, we are trusting God to use the methods and the means to accomplish his purpose. The commander took the advice of Paul's nephew seriously. He probably knew Ananias well enough to know that the high priest would go along with this assassination plot. The commander also realized that Paul's enemies in Jerusalem would stop at nothing to see him dead. As long as Paul was in Jerusalem, there was a danger of rioting. Consequently, Claudius prepared to send him to the Roman provincial capital with a heavy guard under cover of night. The total number of soldiers may have been 270 or 470, depending on the meaning of dexiolobi, or spearmen. This word may refer to either foot soldiers or to led horses. The question is whether there were, in addition to the 200 infantrymen and 70 cavalrymen, 200 spearmen or 200 extra horses. The third hour of the night was 9 p.m. This is the third time that Paul left a city secretly at night. Obviously, Claudius Lysias did not want the assassination of a Roman citizen on his record, so he took precautions to protect Paul. Paul's guards continued to treat him with the respect due a Roman citizen. The commander even provided horses for him to ride on. The size of the escort is not excessive in view of the troubled times and Jewish fanaticism. The commander had to send a copy of the background of Paul's case along with Paul himself. Luke wrote that what follows in the text was substantially what the letter contained. This is the first mention of the commander's name in Acts. His Greek name was Lysias, and when he purchased his Roman citizenship, he must also have taken as his first name the Roman name of the Emperor Claudius. Felix was the governor of the Roman province of Syria, which included Judea. Claudius Lysias addressed Felix politely. The commander put himself in the best possible light in view of the facts. He mentioned that he had rescued Paul in the temple courtyard, but he did not include that he almost flogged Paul. New in this letter is a mention of Paul's arrest by the Jews, evidently the Jewish temple police. Lysias wrote that he had rescued Paul because he had learned that Paul was a Roman citizen, but in fact the commander only learned of Paul's Roman citizenship after he had arrested him. Of particular importance is the notice that in Lysias' judgment, Paul was not guilty of any crime, deserving death or imprisonment, but his case only involved questions about the Jews' law. This was another judgment that favoured not only Paul, but Christianity by a Roman official, which Luke carefully documented. Every Roman magistrate before whom Paul appeared, that is Gallio, Lysias, Felix and Festus, declared him innocent. Claudius Lysias told the Jewish leaders to go to Caesarea if they wanted to prosecute Paul after Paul had left Jerusalem. Paul's trip back to Caesarea. The large group of Roman soldiers escorted Paul through the Judean hill country and the Shephelah, or the foothills, by night to the town of Antipatris, which was about 37 miles northwest of Jerusalem. In the morning, the foot soldiers returned to the barracks in Jerusalem from Antipatris, the Old Testament Athey. But the 70 remaining cavalry soldiers escorted Paul the rest of the way to Caesarea. The remaining 28 miles to Caesarea was flatter terrain in an area that had a sparser Jewish population. Paul's party travelled this distance in daylight. Paul's departure from Jerusalem was the first leg of his journey to Rome. God had used Paul as his witness in Jerusalem once again and had preserved him to witness to the uttermost parts of the earth. Paul's ministry in Caesarea was as a prisoner. Luke devoted about 3 chapters to Paul's ministry in Caesarea primarily to re-emphasize the legality of Christianity, while various Roman officials scrutinized it, and to re-emphasize major themes in Paul's addresses. The governor or procurator of Judea at this time was Antonius Felix. Pontius Pilate occupied this office from AD 26 to 36. Felix had a reputation for being a harsh ruler who had risen from a lowly background. The Roman historian Tacitus described him as follows: Antonius Felix practiced every kind of cruelty and lust, wielding the power of king with all the instincts of a slave. Felix was apparently a freed man, someone who had been a bondsman, but he had received his freedom from an authoritative Roman, who in this case was Emperor Claudius's mother, Antonia. He was the first former slave ever to become the governor of a Roman province. Felix rose to power as a result of his influential brother, his self-serving political maneuvering, and his 3 calculating marriages. He normally dealt very severely with Jews, especially the assassins, the terrorists who sought to overthrow Roman rule by assassinating key Romans and pro-Roman Jews. Felix inquired concerning Paul's home province for the following reason. If Paul had come from an area in the empire that had its own ruler, in addition to having a Roman governor, then that local authority had a right to witness the proceedings. Cilicia was not such a place, however, so Felix could deal with Paul himself. He needed to hear the testimony of Paul's accusers, because this was required by Roman law. Consequently, Felix kept Paul in the governor's official residence, Herod's Praetorium, which Herod the Great had built, until Paul's accusers arrived and he could conduct a hearing. The governor's palace had cells for prisoners. Paul would have been fairly comfortable there, since he was a Roman citizen who had not even been formally charged with a crime. This is not the same praetorium as the one mentioned in the Gospels, since this one was in Caesarea and the other was in Jerusalem. And guys, I'll leave a link as always to these wonderful notes in the show notes for you. Now, obviously, Paul had an internal perspective, and especially throughout the last few years of his life. So today's daily devotion from Dr. Charles Stanley is titled Eternal Perspective. It's based on 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8. Each will receive his own reward according to his own labour. Dr. Stanley writes, how frequently do you think about eternity? Often people talk of time as passing too quickly, or of not having enough of it to do the things they want to. But how often do they fix their thoughts on how life will be in heaven and the responsibilities they'll be given there because of their faithfulness here on earth? Yet the Apostle Paul instructed, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. What did Paul mean when he said the days are evil? He understood that most people have their minds set on things that are fading or that contain little eternal value. Learning how to manage your time in a way that honours Christ comes down to a matter of discipline and wisdom. Are you focused on the things God has given you to do, the things that are eternal, or are you being drawn away by other, less meaningful activities? Refuse to yield to the pressures around you. Focus your life on what matters to the Lord, and you will find that it is indeed time eternally well spent. And he prays, Jesus, teach me how to invest my time wisely, in a manner that will count in eternity. Amen. Yeah, look, that's something that I pray for pretty regularly, is just how can I redeem my days? I know that each day here on earth is precious, and I know that I live in a fallen world and I am absolutely a sinner. So I want to be able to at least redeem my days until I'm either raptured or I pass away. There's no sugarcoating it. But yeah, it's a wonderful daily devotion, as always, from Dr. Charles Stanley, and I pray that he was also a blessing to you. Until next time, guys, I pray for each and every one of you. God bless you all, and take care, and Maranatha.